Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey folks, today we're going to take a quick look at the new English language version of Heart of Crown, now from Japanime Games, originally from, I think, Flip Flops, yes, is the designer and the self-publisher name. Now, I've done a review of Heart of Crown before, a more thorough review with an overview of the gameplay elements. I'm not totally happy with that review, so watch it at your own risk. However, I go into way more detail on that one if you really want to know the nuts and bolts of the game, because that's not what I'm going to do here. This is just to talk about the game some more, revisit it in a sense, and I'm also going to show you some screenshots of or otherwise known as photographs of the new English components, so you can see for yourself the box and some of the fancy stuff that came with the Kickstarter version that may not necessarily be in your version of the game. I don't do that to humble brag or anything like that. It's just, I just wanted to show it off on camera. So there you have it. So with that in mind, let's talk about it a little bit more. If you're not familiar with Heart of Crown, don't want to go and watch that other video, that's fine. Heart of Crown is essentially a deck building game that is a hodgepodge of other elements from other disparate deck building games, but coming together into a cohesive whole, which I find far more interesting than many other deck builders on the market. So much so that even though deck building is one of my favorite genres, this has risen to the top of the list, and in fact is in my top 10 games of all time, or top 10 games that I love right now as of this moment. So we'll see how it shakes out in the future. But as far as competitive, strategic deck building games go, this is top tits for me. Obviously, I like games like Legendary much more, but that's a whole other beast of a deck building game. The thing about Heart of Crown is that it takes elements from games like Dominion or Tanto Cuore being the game that Dominion is based on, and games like Ascension and DC Deck Builder as well. DC Deck Building game being the forebearer of Ascension. So much misinformation. But I think that Heart of Crown handles a lot of these things in a much better way and adds some interesting wrinkles of its own into the mix. So what's going on thematically is that you're trying to back a princess, nominate a princess for the throne of this very generic fantasy kingdom. But in order to do that, you need to have enough succession points in order to coronate that princess. You get succession points by having huge tracts of land. That is essentially what you have to do. You have to make a kingdom for your princess. Eventually, you'll get the princess first, then give her land, and then continue to add prestige to it. And when you get to a certain point of points, you can win the game, assuming no one else has done it at the same time. So, lots of things going on here. First off, the way the market works, very interesting because it's sort of a mixture of randomized row building, like Ascension, but also the staticness of a game like Dominion or Tanto Cuore. So, for instance, when the cards come out randomly into the row, but if the same card comes out, it stacks on top of one that's already out there. So you can have cards sitting out there for quite a while, and it's not quite as random. Now, there's pluses and minuses to that, but I thought it's pretty interesting because it means that it limits the chaos, but it still keeps a little bit of chaos in there to keep it more interesting. Another interesting aspect of the game is how cards link together. In other games like Dominion, you have buys. You have buys and you have actions. So you play cards, you have like one buy and one action, but then you can play cards to get more buys and more actions. And that's kind of how it works here, but how it really works is that you link cards together with these little arrows on the side. So as long as you can keep playing cards that have arrows on them, linking to cards that have more arrows, you can keep playing cards. But some of the more powerful cards of the game are dead ends. They have no arrows branching off of them, which just means that that's it. It sits there like a lump. But some cards have two arrows, which means you can play one of those lump cards that does nothing, but then keep going in another direction. It's very simple, and again, it's sort of just the same thing as like, I play this card to get more actions, to get more buys, but it works mechanically. It's far more interesting to me than just I play a card and get more buys. And it's easier to see the visual of it working out there and you chaining the cards together. And very rarely you can get huge chains of cards, and it's very satisfying to do that. There's a very good variety of cards here. I should mention that the Kickstarter version I have, and I'll show pictures of it, came with 2 expansions, small expansions that come in little clamshell packs. Not a ton of cards, but enough to keep it interesting, and each one has a new princess. Now, the princess aspect of the game is sort of the core of what this game is pitching to you to set it apart. But it's actually it's interesting, but I think it sort of pales in comparison to how interesting the other parts of the game are that I was just speaking about. But it's still a neat thing because you have these princesses laid out on the table at the beginning of the game. They all cost 6 points to get, so you can't get them right away, but you will eventually be able to get them at a pretty early point in the game. The thing is, they all have different special abilities, so you kind of have to plan your strategy around which princess do I want to get? Do I just want to go for the one that gives me a lot of succession points? Or want to go for one that has an ability that's not useful right away, but could be very useful in the future? Long-term planning. One that helps me build my estate better, or the lands better, that type of thing. But the only fault with that is that some princesses are clearly better than others. Other than that, it's actually, there's a variant in the English rulebook that I never saw before. For the Japanese version I had, maybe I just missed it. I'll admit I might have just missed it, but I haven't seen it up to this point. Where you actually, when you choose a princess, you take another one as guardian, which really just means you're taking it out of circulation for someone else to get. And you can only do that if you're playing with expansions that give you up to 8 princesses for a 4-player game. But still, I think that's really interesting. It might be a way to alleviate that problem, where if you're the first to get one, you can benefit from getting a clearly overpowered princess and screw someone else out of getting it. That might be a little bit too cutthroat now that I think about it. But speaking of cutthroat, this game does attacks and defenses. That's another way that sets itself apart from other deck building games. And I think it works pretty well because it keeps the game very interactive and fun, and it's not too debilitating, at least most of the time, unless you're really getting slammed. But it's interesting because having the princesses and having to rush to get to a certain amount of points makes it feel a little bit more like a race than other types of games, even though those games are until a pile runs out. And this one is like you clearly have benchmarks. When you see someone nominate a princess, you're like, I gotta nominate a princess too. When you see someone start grabbing high point like Duke cards or something, I gotta get one of those too. They're getting ahead of me. I have to do something. Which makes it more disappointing that the game can very easily end up in what they call sudden death overtime, which is weird for a game about princesses. And that's my least favorite part of the game. And so much so that I have tried home rolling in the past. It hasn't really worked out. And we just hope that it doesn't happen. If you not familiar with the rules, what that basically means is that if you have enough points to, which I think is 20 points off the top of my head, to declare a coronation, succession coronation on your turn, you still have to finish out the round. If at any point, like let's say you're not the last one in the round, someone else or multiple someone else's declare that they also have enough points, then everyone who's eligible, everyone who has met the threshold of points goes into sudden death, where now they play to 30 points. And anyone else who didn't have enough points is left out completely. That sucks. I wish there was another way to do it. And I wish they would come out with an official version of it. I didn't look through all the variants. Actually, it did. I don't think they had anything like that. So that's my one big fault of the game. Luckily, it doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen with alarming frequency. Other than that, though, this is still one of my favorite deck building games. I think they did an admirable job with the English release. As you can see, the card art still looks as good as it did before. It looks a little bit cleaner now. With this official translation, some of the cards have an overwhelming amount of text. I guess I never noticed before when I was playing with my original Japanese version. And way more than many other deck building games. I guess that can be seen as a fault too, but coming from a Magic the Gathering type background, I don't mind it too much. Especially some of those older Magic cards, which were just like, wha-bam, wall of text. I got that feeling again here. But I like that because this is definitely a more, to sound very snooty, cerebral deck building game. It really is, and that's kind of why I like it so much and why it has replay value for me. And now I can play it officially. The stuff that I'm showing off as far as the images go, playmats, sleeves, coins, you don't need any of that stuff, but it's very nice. If they sell it separately later on, consider getting it because, hey, deck building games all kind of look the same at a certain point. Why not bling it out and have it look nice, especially with official stuff? And I'm not trying to sell you on it. I just think that stuff looks nice. I will say, however, the coins, which are just like weird plastic embossed coins, every single one of them came individually wrapped in plastic with another plastic case on every single coin. I'll show a picture of it. It was embarrassingly tedious to take them all off, so I hope they don't do that for future print runs of them. And to the point where I'm like, am I supposed to leave these on? I don't think so. Other than that, I like the presentation of the game. The box is just big enough to fit this with the expansions. And no, there's another big expansion they haven't actually released yet, so we'll see if it's actually big enough for that, including with the sleeves. I dig it. I mean, I liked this game before. I'm glad I have an official version of it, so it doesn't look like, ghetto gangster with like my crappy printouts stuffed in the sleeves of crappy sleeves. Now I have nice sleeves and all that stuff. Good deck building game. Check it out if you are so inclined. That is Heart of Crown, now from Japanime Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.